Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the 2024 NFL Outlook on New York Giants' new rookie wide receiver, Malik Nabers, based on data. So we will look at his pre-draft profile. We're going to do a team analysis on the Giants, schedule analysis, and his week-by-week matchups to see what the obstacles and opportunities might await him in 2024. So everything to do with Malik Nabers. If you are a owner of Malik Nabers in terms of dynasty purposes or just fantasy purposes, this is the video for you to kind of see what are some of the things you should prepare yourself for as the season goes on. And on top of that, just general stuff if you're a Giants fan. So stay tuned until the end of the video where I give my final analysis on Malik Nabers. But let's get right into it. So first off is the setup. So the setup is, Malik Nabers was drafted by the Giants at pick number 6 in this year's draft. The typical expectation of a approximate value of a wide receiver selected at pick 6 since 1969 is 95.85 out of 100, meaning most wide receivers picked at selection 6 are 95.85% better than the majority of NFL wide receivers. That's what's expected. That's the expectation. But what makes Nabers unique is that he has a high pre-draft profile data score on top of an elite landing spot. So he's not just a solid wide receiver in terms of where he was selected. He's also pretty solid in terms of his draft profile. So getting into his actual pre-draft profile, let's take a look at a couple different things. So first off, we're going to look at offensive market share production scores. You can pause the video right here to kind of get an idea of that. But he had tremendous data in this respect, 92 percentile in terms of his receiving market share. His total offensive market share, which is the percentage of the overall offense, which includes rushing and receiving, was 92.52, and his touchdown market share was 76.46. When you look at this data, he's pretty much is in line with the All-Pro threshold and is well in line with the Pro Bowl averages at the position. So he is a strong candidate to hit either one of those outcomes just based on his regular market share data. But it gets better when you take a look at his efficiency scores. So taking a look at efficiency, which is things like yards per reception and touchdowns per touch, he was fantastic in those respects. All those areas hit at least within the all-pro averages of the position when it came to those areas. So he not only is elite in terms of his percentage of the offense, he also is elite in terms of a per snap basis for him, which is exactly what you're looking for with a player like this. Then, of course, when you get to wide receiver athleticism, this, of course, was based on pro day numbers at LSU, but fantastic numbers here. 95 percentile in terms of explosiveness, which is the vertical and the broad jump measured against his mass density. And then his speed score was 92.52 out of 100, which also is very impressive. So extremely athletic player, extremely productive, everything you're looking for at the position, which is, again, why he's such a high prospect from that perspective. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, adjusted production takes a look at his production for his level of competition, for the team that he played on, and for his age. And when you take a look at him from this perspective, 99 percentile in terms of his age score, 98 percentile in terms of his MSA rating, and 99 percentile in terms of his pass rating. And the pass rating takes a look at his efficiency plus his market share production. So his overall profile is magnificent. That's the only thing you can really say about it. It is one of the best wide receiver profiles that we've seen in a long time. What makes Nabers a prize fantasy wide receiver is this, his overall EAV or data profile. So when you take all those numbers that I just mentioned, you put them all together and you give it a score, was 99.95 out of 100. So he's by far 99.95% better from a data perspective than every wide receiver taken in the draft since 1969. That is extremely impressive. Since 1969, wide receivers with a 99 or higher data score taken in the top 10 in the NFL draft are as follows. Calvin Johnson, Rob Moore, Larry Fitzgerald, David Boston, Tim Brown, Amari Cooper, Herman Moore, Wes Chandler, Andre Johnson, Ron Sellers, Michael Crabtree, Sammy Watkins, and Mike Evans. So that is a really strong list of wide receivers to be mentioned with in terms of where he was selected and how he tested as a prospect. That's impressive. But with that list and additional wide receiver information, we can formulate one potential based on the current status. So, in other words, we can take this information that we have and look at him compared to other wide receivers in the past to kind of get an idea of what he might look like long term. But first off, we need to get to the actual analysis of the Giants' 2023 NFL team because we need to know, one, what the situation was for all the wide receivers that I just mentioned, and also, two, what the situation is going to happen for Malik Nabers. Where is he going to? What quarterback is going to be throwing the football? What type of team is he going to be on? And this is the type of team that Malik Nabers is going to be on, which can affect his fantasy ability. So first off, the Giants ended in 2023 with one of the worst offenses in the NFL. They ranked 3.92 out of 100 in terms of OSRS, which is a offensive simple rating score formulated by Pro Football Reference. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to Pro Football Reference. And Daniel Jones in particular had a QBR percentile score of 13.03 out of 100. It by far was one of the worst offenses in the NFL last season. Many believed that Daniel Jones would not survive this offseason, but here we are. With this information, does Daniel Jones being a historically below average quarterback hurt Nabers' chances to break out in 2024? That is a big thing that we really need to answer in this video because a lot of times you have to understand the situations. Take a look at a guy like Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson went into a situation where he had an incredible rookie season as a wide receiver, but he also landed in a position where he had a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, a fairly strong Vikings team. I mean, he wasn't taken in the top 10. He was taken in the lower area. So, what does this typically say about those wide receivers, that are taken to teams that are really bad and have bad quarterbacks? That's what we're going to take a look at here. And taking a look at this list right here, this shows you all the wide receivers that were taken in the top 10 of the draft with a 95 to 99.99 percentile data score compared to the QBR of the quarterback and OSRS, or offensive ranking. So what this looks at is all the wide receivers that tested similar from a data perspective to Malik Nabers and everything, including draft status. And then we're going to take a look at the offense from the previous year in terms of the quarterback that they have and also in terms of their overall offensive output, which is measured in OSRS. So taking a look at this data right here for that purpose, what I found was this. Wide receiver market share versus QBR for wide receivers with the prior parameters. QBR in year one rookie wide receiver performance is not as tied to QB performance as we might think. So when I did a general correlation coefficient, I looked at the wide receiver's 1 year production, and I based it on market share production for that wide receiver in terms of their first year, their rookie season, essentially, out of all those wide receivers I just mentioned. And when I looked at that data and then tied it to the QB performance, specifically, how well the quarterback was the prior year and the current year that he played, there was no correlation between year one production and QBR for wide receivers meeting this parameter. However, there is a correlation for years 2 and 3. So essentially, that first year as a wide receiver, as a rookie wide receiver, there's not really much of a correlation between how well they produce as a wide receiver in their first year and the quarterback that they have on roster. So this is important information because it just goes to show that just because Daniel Jones is not the strongest of a quarterback in terms of his past accomplishments and what he did last year especially, it has no bearing in terms of how productive Malik Nabers is going to be this year. In other words, like there's no correlation. There's no relationship between those variables, and there's other factors or other variables that can affect year one production. And I'll kind of mention that a little bit as we go on, but there was a correlation though with year two. So the way my general theory on this is the first year that a wide receiver is in the NFL as a rookie, there's some acclimation to the NFL that they have to go through. There's some stresses, there's new pressure, there's new things that they have to go through in that 1 year that can affect them. So they may be a really good wide receiver, but they're having to learn a new playbook. They're having to get accustomed to a new quarterback. They're having to get accustomed to the schedule of the NFL. All these other factors that can affect year one performance. So they haven't been conditioned to the new pressures, and as a result, regardless of how good that wide receiver is, that year one is not always going to be the best. That's why if a wide receiver doesn't have the best rookie season, don't judge them too harshly on that, because that's it's really hard to kind of predict that. There's a lot of different acclimation to the NFL that not every wide receiver is going to have an instant translation to. So that's essentially what the year one data says in terms of that. There's no correlation, there's no relationship between these variables there. Now, when you get to year two, though, you do have an effect on that. So if a wide receiver, after having that sort of meh rookie season, because they're still getting acclimated to stuff, they end up in year two and they still have a bad quarterback, you're going to have some effects from that. If you go into year two and you have uh, the offense gets worse in terms of year two, there's going to be an effect on that in terms of their actual production. It's not a very strong correlation, 0.29. So the scale for correlation coefficients is essentially anywhere from 0 to 0.99, basically 1, essentially. 1 means if this happens, this happens. That's like how strong that correlation is. So in terms of this, the correlation coefficient is 0.29. That's not the strongest correlation. Typically, strong correlations are about 0.4 to 0.5, 0.6, and then really strong is even higher than that. But essentially, there's a slight correlation to this. So again, when I talk about probability, I'm not talking about certainty. I'm just talking about the probability of these events happening. And but all I can really say is based on this data, and again, I'm not trying to go too crazy down this road, is that there is a correlation, a slight correlation between how well the quarterback is and their wide receiver market share production. But it's not as strong as you would think, but it definitely shows up in year two and year three. So in other words, if this wide receiver is truly a really good NFL wide receiver, then you typically want to see that breakout in year two and year three if the quarterback has gotten better. And if that's not the case, then you need to worry, essentially, is what that's about. Now, in terms of OSRS, though, which is the offensive ranking, so this takes a look at how great the offense is. Similar to quarterback data, there is a negative correlation to that in terms of year one. However, there is a positive correlation in terms of year two and year three, but it's not as strong in year two as it was with the QBR. So essentially, the offense being above average can help a wide receiver produce a little bit more in terms of market share purposes, but it doesn't have as strong of a correlation as, say, the QB does in year two for this. And again, this is based on all those wide receivers I just showed you before. Now, what this means, so whether Nabers succeeds in 2024 or not, Daniel Jones will not have a massive play in that respect. That's essentially what this means. So if Nabers is a great wide receiver, he's going to be successful regardless of the quarterback that's there. That's as simple as that. If he truly is a generational wide receiver prospect, he is going to produce like that regardless of who is there at the quarterback position. I know that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, but it just is what it is based on the data. Now, there are other variables that play in year one wide receiver production, and much of that also includes the wide receiver's ability to adapt to the NFL environment and produce. So here's one example of this. So right before we get into that next aspect of it, this is what the average market share production is for top 10 wide receivers selected in the top 10 with 95 to 99.99 percentile data scores. So essentially, taking a look at all those wide receivers I just looked at that were taken in the top 10, the average year one production is about 69 percentile. Year two is 73, and then year three is 74. So you would expect the rookie season, even if he doesn't have the best rookie season, year two and year three is where you really want to see that growth in them as a wide receiver prospect. So this is just for those purposes. So year one is kind of a topsy-turvy year where they're getting used to the environment, and then year two and year three is when they finally have that big break as a quarterback, or as a wide receiver, I should say. However, what you could also say about this data, though, is that in terms of wide receivers, it's a bit of a hit or miss position anyway. So not every wide receiver is going to have a Andre Johnson-like career. Some of them are going to be just okay wide receivers, and that's just been the history of wide receivers in general. It has a very high bust rate compared to other positions. So that's just something to keep in mind, and that's why these numbers are not as high as you would expect them to be overall. Now, getting to the Giants' overall offensive roster. So this is taking a look at the team that he's going to be on. Now, this was based on data from Our Lands in terms of the rankings here, but the other data is stuff that I formulated myself. NFL positional AV is from Pro Football Reference. That's essentially the average AV they've had as a prospect in their career compared to other prospects across the NFL time span. Data grades are based on all the stuff that I do as a evaluator in terms of their pre-draft profile. So that's what the EAV score is. It's the expected AV of a prospect based on their production, their athleticism, and all their other statistical factors there. The age is, of course, just what their age is going to be this year. It's not their exact age. It's just what their age is going to be listed as on Pro Football Reference. And then EFF is the efficiency score, which takes a look at advanced NFL data in different categories of the position for that. But this is what the Giants' offense looks like this year. In terms of what you see here, the wide receiver position for the Giants is actually fairly strong. Data grade wise, Jalen Hyatt had a 92 percentile overall wide receiver score, which is very strong. Wan'Dale Robinson also had an 87 percentile data score. And just for reference, most NFL starters, data grade wise, usually had a 70 percentile or higher data grade. That's where the majority of NFL starters usually ended up, is in that particular area. So all these players on this team pretty much are within range of that, with the exception of a couple players. So a couple of the weak spots here. Daniel Jones obviously sticks out like a sore thumb. His data grade coming out of college was 49 percentile, and then Aaron Stinney at left guard is 42 percentile over there, and he also is a much older prospect as well. So those are kind of the weak spots on this roster, but the biggest thing to take away from the Giants roster in terms of this, when you look at the NFL data comparison, so this takes a look at the offensive ranks, is that the wide receiver depth on the Giants is actually fairly strong, which I think is going to be helpful for Nabers because he's not going to be the only offensive threat here. And then, of course, when you look at that from this perspective, the positives I think Nabers has going for him in year one is that he likely will not be the only offensive threat. So Singletary, for example, Waller, and a few of the prior wide receivers I mentioned in Robinson and Hyatt could develop into formidable threats to give Nabers the space to breathe and develop as a rookie. You never want to be in a situation where the wide receiver is going into an environment where he's the only option and NFL teams start keying on him only because there's nobody else. But in this particular case, there are other wide receiver options there. Nabers will have probably one of the most talented. Nabers will be the most talented offensive threat, but he also is going to have other options around him to kind of take the pressure off him. Again, these aren't the best options ever, but they are good enough to do that. Singletary has been a fairly solid running back prospect. He's not the best. He's not a great one. He's not like Saquon Barkley, but he's a solid NFL running back that can take some pressure off of Nabers. And then, of course, I mentioned all the other wide receivers here. So it's a situation where he'll be the top threat. He's going to be the most talented player from a data perspective, but he does have other weapons around him to take the focus off of him, which I think will give him the ability to grow as a rookie here. Again, it's not the best situation to have Daniel Jones as your quarterback, but as I stated before, based on the data I just showed you before, that's not really going to have much of a correlation there with that. It's not really going to affect him as much as people think. It's really going to go off of what Nabers does and the other variables involved here. And I think based on that, Nabers should have a strong year because of this. Next up, let's get to the Giants' schedule. So this is a quick look at the Giants' schedule this year to kind of look at the matchups here. So we're going to take a look at all the defenses that he's going to face this year. And this is just a general chart over here. So the offensive ranking is the overall data ranking of the offense from a data perspective. The Giants have about a 28 percentile data score for that. The defense for the Giants is about a 9, and then the second area right here is what the um, the offense and the defensive scores are going to be for, like, say, the Minnesota Vikings are 11th, and then their defense is 32. So that's how you can read this chart. The offense slash defensive area right here is the difference between the offense versus the defense that they're going to be facing. The defense slash offense is the difference between their defense versus the offense they're going to face. And then the overall difference is all that stuff combined. So it kind of shows you what advantage they have from a data perspective each game, if you will. And taking a look at this data here, starting with week one, the Minnesota Vikings. This is going to be a pretty good start for them because the Vikings do not have the strongest defense from a data perspective or from a past performance perspective. And when you look at the secondary for them in particular, taking a look at, Josh Metellus and of course Evans at cornerback, this could be a game where Neighbors actually has a really strong week one performance because the secondary is not that great for the Vikings. And Byron Murphy Jr., for example, does have some strong scores here and there, but he's not a 99 percentile cornerback prospect. So there is a potential here that this could be a pretty strong start for Neighbors. The pass rush as well for the Vikings has dipped out a lot, so they're really going to depend on the secondary to hold up. And I think in this particular NFL that we live in right now, and the way the rules are, this could be a very strong game for the Giants. So do not be surprised if the Giants have a really great start to week one because this defense all around is not the best. And even though Harrison Smith is a strong safety, he's been a strong safety for a long time, he's 35 years old this year. So this is going to be, if you're going to think about starting Neighbors week one, this is a perfect situation for him to start in where he could have a really great start to his career because of the defense he's going to play. Then, of course, you get to week two. This is where we're going to look at the Washington Commanders. Their secondary is awful. There's no other ways around it. They're going to be starting a rookie this year in Mike Sanders, who didn't have the best data grade to begin with. And then, of course, you look at the other cornerbacks and safeties that they have at the position. So this is going to be a blowout. This is going to be a very good game for the Giants from a data perspective as well. Now, the interior defensive line for the Commanders is very strong with guys like Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne. But when you look at the pass rushers here, you look at the cornerbacks here, there's not much of a threat there at all. So, again, week two, I think, is going to be another strong game for Neighbors when you look at it from this perspective. Moving on to week three. So, week three is where they actually start to face a fairly strong defense in the Cleveland Browns. Their secondary is pretty decent in terms of data grade perspective, but haven't really lived up to the NFL positional data yet. But Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome, Denzel Ward, Juan Thornhill, Grant Delpit, this is going to be the first week that I see Neighbors struggling, or at the very least, we get to prove if he is who we thought he was in this particular game, because this is going to be the very first time that he's going to face a really legit strong NFL defense. And on top of that, of course, you look at the defensive line for the Browns as well, which is fairly strong too. So this could be the first game where the Giants actually have some issues on offense, and Neighbors could be affected by that. Of course, you get to week four, the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys, in terms of their secondary, there's a lot of high data grade players here, like Trayvon Diggs, Jordan Lewis, and of course Malik Hooker, Donovan Wilson, and Deron Bland. But none of these players have really lived up to their actual NFL production. So that's going to be a positive for them in that respect. Is that these are secondary players that have done really well in terms of their data grades, but the overall team as a whole is not really, in terms of how they actually perform in the NFL, is not exactly where you want it to be. So this could be another good game. This could be another good game for Neighbors. It's kind of 50-50 because there is that pass rush pressure for, Michael Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. But this could be a decent game. This could be another game when Neighbors kind of shows off a little bit because he has so much ability as a wide receiver prospect that he could kind of show off in this game. Then, of course, we get to week five. Taking a look at this. This is against the Seattle Seahawks. They have a strong secondary as well. Guys like Julian Love and Rayshon Jenkins have not really lived up to their NFL potential yet, but they could this year. And they also have a strong interior defensive line as well. So this is probably going to be one of the first, another big tests for Nabers in terms of this particular matchup for him. Then, of course, we get to week 6 in the Cincinnati Bengals. They have a fairly strong secondary, but the defensive line and the kind of the linebacker position to a certain extent, there is a little bit more leeway here. So, taking a look at this particular area for them, uh, secondary wise, this might be a game where they kind of struggle a little bit. But I think Daniel Jones will have a little bit more time to throw the football because of the types of pass rushes he's going to be facing, and the ages of them as well. So they might have lost a step this year. So that's going to be another positive to look at here in Week 6. Week 7, we go to the Philadelphia Eagles. There is a lot of what are they going to become with the Eagles? They did draft 2 secondary players in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Those are going to be players that they kind of have as a 1-year starters here, and the secondary also is another positive for them as well. But this is going to be an interesting sort of thing. The Eagles on defense haven't really lived up to expectations. You look at guys like Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and Jalen Carter. None of those guys have really lived up to the AV potential that they had from a data perspective. So this is going to be another season where it's going to be interesting to see where the Eagles kind of go from here in terms of their defense. But they did improve a lot in their secondary, but these are rookies. So this is going to be sort of like a rookie on rookie kind of game here. And don't be surprised if Quinyon Mitchell gets, they decide to put him on Malik Nabers just because of how fast he is. But this is going to be another interesting little test for the Giants. But I think they can rise above that. I think Nabers has the potential to kind of beat a guy like Mitchell because he has other tools in his toolbox than just his speed and athletic ability. Then, of course, we get to week 8. This is going to be a really tough test against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, their secondary is not the best, but the front four is really where there's massive issues in terms of T.J. Watt and Larry Ogunjobi, and of course Cameron Hayward and Alex Highsmith. They have probably one of the best front four defenses in terms of actual NFL production in the NFL. And then, of course, you look at even Benton at nose tackle. So this is a very strong front 4-5 section here, and that could have some effects here. But the secondary does have some weaknesses. Deshaun Elliott hasn't really lived up to his expectations. Darius Rush as well, and Joey Porter Jr. also hasn't lived up to the expectations. And I'm sorry, Joey Porter Jr. Is not that fast of a cornerback, so this could be this is another area where Malik Nabers could take advantage of this particular situation, but this also could be a anemic offense just because of how great the Pittsburgh Steelers are. Moving on to Week 9, this is where they face the Washington Commanders again. Similar situation. The secondary is not that great, but the front four is a little bit better. But I think it's still going to be a decent exhibition for the Giants offense because of the issues that are on the other team. Then, of course, we get to Week 10. This is where they face the Carolina Panthers. Their secondary has a lot of holes in terms of the cornerback positions here, so I don't see much of an issue here. But the front four is where there's going to be some issues. So if the Giants' offensive line holds up, I think they're going to be able to have enough time for Daniel Jones to kind of deliver some balls to Nabers. I think this could be a very strong game for him as well. Week 12, this is where they face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have a very strong secondary and defense in general. So this might be one of those games where they struggle as well. And then, of course, week 13, you go back to face the Cowboys again. Usually, this could be a 50-50 type of thing. He might not have the best showing in terms of early in the season, but might do better this time. Then, of course, we get to the next game here in the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have a very strong secondary and decent front four, and that's going to have some effects here as well. So this is another area where it might not be the best game for Nabers, but it would be a good test for him. And he's playing the Saints. So again, I'm not saying he's a Saints fan, but he is from LSU. So there might be some showing off going involved in this particular matchup. Then, of course, we move to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have a very strong secondary, with the exception of Ardarius Washington, but they did draft a lot of rookie cornerbacks this year, in like Nate Wiggins. So there is that potential that Ardarius Washington may not be that starting, nickel back. So keep that in mind as we look at Week 15. So it might be a strong advantage, or it might not. If our Darius Washington is not the starting nickelback, then it could be a good area for Malik Nabers to improve. Then, of course, we get to Week 16 in the Atlanta Falcons. Their secondary has some strengths, but also has a lot of weaknesses. Clark Phillips, Mike Hughes, and DeMarco Helms have some issues here, but the rest of this team is pretty decent. Week 17, they go on to face the Colts. Their secondary has some strengths and weaknesses as well, which I think Nabers could take advantage of. And then, of course, you get to Week 18 where they face the Eagles again in the final game of the season, where we're going to have to know a little bit more once the rookies start to play. And this might be the best sort of test of where Nabers is at, because, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, this is after they've played hopefully 17 games, or 16 games, I should say, and then they finally meet for this particular thing. So in general, the outlook I have for Nabers, and the chart at the top shows you all the wide receivers who tested similar to Nabers, but went to teams that had very poor quarterbacks and very poor offenses in the prior season. And that list includes Andre Johnson, Mike Evans, David Boston, J.D. Hill, Peter Warrick, Ron Sellers, and Charles Rogers. So there's a lot to consider with Nabers, but I believe ultimately that he will have a successful rookie campaign. There are numerous opportunities for him in 2024. So don't look at it as a bad situation. When I did my general data for them, there was about 4 offensive advantaged games this year. So where the offense had about a 10-point advantage on the defense that they were facing. There was about 4 of those games this year. So they do have the potential to have some strong games this season. But the team has to work collectively. Daniel Jones, I believe, needs to come back and have a similar season to what he had in 2022, where he still wasn't great. He was about a 50 percentile quarterback that year, but that's better than what he was last year in the 13 percentile range. So there's a lot of stuff that we have yet to see, but I think this is still a situation that he's playing some strong defenses here and there, but I think there are some positives here with it. So, he'll face multiple nickel cornerbacks that he could light fire on. So we just went down the whole list. You can go back and take a look at it, but there was a lot of nickel cornerbacks mentioned that are dumpster fire level data prospects, and they could take advantage of that when Nabers. At the same time, do they have an offensive coordinator who is savvy enough to use Nabers like that? That's something that I don't know. I can't really judge that on that. That's going to come down to what the offensive coordinator does and what the team does from a game planning perspective. Because Nabers is a type of prospect where, and this is even on film, where you have to kind of move him around a little bit in terms of his ability. So he could just play a straight up X spot and do okay, but if you put him in the slot, if you line him up in different places, he's going to be able to take advantage of any person in front of him because of his athletic ability. So if the Giants have that type of offensive coordinator, he could do massive numbers this year. If they don't have that type of offensive coordinator, then he might just be kind of bleh as a prospect. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to see, is if the Giants are going to be creative enough to really take advantage of that. And that remains to be seen. But I would say his floor in 2024 is the 51.51 percentile with a ceiling of 98.96 in terms of his production. So this is based on the past. So based on all the wide receivers I just mentioned at the top chart, he could either be a average wide receiver this year, or he could be one of the best wide receivers this year. And I tend to go with him being one of the best, but that remains to be seen in his overall data. So follow stuff out of the way. I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. You can also check out my other stuff on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Geometrics. And I thank you guys so much. Like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more videos like this, I'm going to tell you guys like this. If this video can get, let's say, 25 likes, I will do another video like this, because this was a lot of work to kind of get this video out and kind of edit it and kind of get through all the data and stuff. But if I can get at least 25 likes on this video, then I will do another one like this on, say, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Rome Odunze or another sort of rookie wide receiver, or even a running back. I could even do running backs, but in the comment section below, tell me what other prospect you want to see get their rookie season covered like this in the comment section. But with all that stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.